Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Today, my guest is Wendy Smith, the Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management and Faculty Director of the Women's Leadership Initiative at the Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware. She earned her PhD in organizational behavior at Harvard Business School. Today, we're talking about her brand new book, Both and Thinking: Embracing Creative Tensions to Solve Your Toughest Problems. Both and Thinking offers practical advice backed by decades of experience and research to help us understand the paradoxical nature of decision-making to effectively navigate through challenges. I know you will enjoy Wendy Smith. Wendy, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast, all the way from Philly today. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Wendy, you are really unique on the show. You are an academic. You are a professor. For our audience that don't know you, can you talk about what you study, what you teach, and how you came to do what you do now?
I am a professor of leadership and management. So I am a professor at the University of Delaware's Lerner College of Business and Economics. I am also the faculty director of our Women's Leadership Initiative. And I have been studying this question about how leaders, organizations, individuals navigate dilemmas, tensions, challenges that we face in our lives. What are the ways that we do it? What are the traditional ways we do it? Why is it limited? How could we do it better? And it is within this rubric, this idea of noticing paradoxes and living into the both and.
It's interesting because when you say both and, I think of yes and, which you hear about in improv or writing. Can you just talk about why you wanted to answer these questions that you've been working so arduously at for many years?
So many, they say that researchers, that research is me-search, that we're studying the things that we're challenged by. And there's so many moments in my own life where I faced a challenge, a question, a debate, a dilemma, and I felt really stuck. And that stuckness would kind of keep me from moving forward. It would feel really anxiety provoking. And it was, for example, I really struggled about what I wanted to do after I graduated from college. I was a youth leader. I was really involved in all kinds of activities at school, and I wanted to have an impact on the world. And it's funny because I teach leadership now, but I just could not see the path of impact in this kind of amorphous leadership world. In contrast to, I had a really good friend whose father was an orthopedic surgeon, and I had this idea of being a doctor. Well, I could see direct impact there. So I really struggled. Do I go into some amorphous idea of being a leader, or do I go into medicine? And I felt really stuck by that. Or I then went on and I decided to be an academic. But even as I'm going through my PhD, do I continue with being an academic who studies ideas and studies leadership, or do I actually go out and do this thing? And it felt like a real tension there. Or, and so all of these kinds of tug of wars would come up in my own life and my own decision making. I saw my friends grappling with them. When I was studying what I was studying in my PhD, was how the leaders, particularly at IBM, I was studying IBM's senior leaders, and how they were grappling with tensions and either ors of a very different kind. They were trying to innovate and navigating innovation tensions and living between these either ors, these challenges, these tug of wars between what they currently did, their current product, their current lives, and changing to do something new. And so this notion of tensions, whether in my own life or in the research that I was doing, kept coming up. And it seemed like that the ways in which people tended to think about them were limited, and there was a better way. So that's what triggered me to study this question of tensions and dilemmas and how do we manage them.
It seems like it's very relevant to business today because so many of us do need to live in the both and, because the world is changing so quickly. We don't ever know what's coming around the bend. We don't even know what's going to happen next year. And that uncertainty requires a different mindset that I don't think most of us are used to yet. Did you find the last few years? Well, first of all, did you write this? Did you have the idea for this book before COVID, or was this something that came out of COVID?
This book is about 25 years in the making.
Okay.
So the idea of both and came out of my dissertation. It was this notion that underlying our dilemmas are these paradoxes that if we apply or if we engage both and, we can get to a better decision. It came out of my dissertation. It was at that time that I reached out to Marianne Lewis, who is now my longtime colleague, co-author, friend, and who is the co-author on this book. And she had written a paper on this idea in our academic world. And I said to her, I need to know everything you know about this. And the two of us have been researching and exploring this idea for the last 25 years. And really, this book was exactly responding to exactly what you're saying, which is that when we first started talking about both and, moving from either or to both and, being more open, being more creative, being more, most people would tell us, that's like a really nice idea, but it's really not appropriate for business. Like, you got to make clear, decisive, consistent decisions in business. And it's really only the last 10 years or so that we've started to see businesses, leaders, individuals, we've seen politicians, we've seen really talk about living in the both and, moving beyond this false dichotomy either or, and living into the both and. So we wrote this book partially to help people move from either or to both and then mostly because in the last 10 years or so, our colleagues around the world have been doing research on how do you do that. So the book was partially to help people reframe their either ors into both ands, and then really to do a deep dive of, okay, well, how do you go beyond the label of both and to say, what does it take to really do that in our own lives, in our own decisions, in our interpersonal lives, in our parenting, in our partnering, in the work that we do, in our work-life decisions, but also in the leadership that we have in our organizations.
So if somebody embraces creative tension, is the opposite of that being more passive and not wanting to look something a bit scary in the face or avoid it? Is that the opposite of embracing creative tension?
There's a couple of opposites. So one way to what we tend to suggest as the straw woman, if you will, of what happens is that we face we experience these tug of wars, and we pit them as these opposing forces. So either I, really double down on my career, or I double down on my family and my kids and my, domestic demands, and I have to sort of choose between them. Or, I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day, this sort of tension between, am I the kind of person who's super planning oriented and disciplined and scheduled, or am I the kind of person who's spontaneous and so we tend to double down on these either ors. Or said differently, we experience these tug of wars, and the way that we tend to respond to them is that it's an either or. It's a trade-off. We call this a dilemma because these kinds of decisions that sort of beg us to make a decision. And what we would suggest is that before making that decision, before going into how we choose, pause and notice the underlying paradoxes, that these either ors that we're pitting against one another are also interdependent. They define each other, they inform each other, they are interdependent with each other. And that enables us and ask the both and question and open up the alternative possibilities.
What are some of the examples in the book that you highlight?
There's so many. So we could talk about at the individual level, what are the kinds of tensions? The classic, when I do workshops on both and moving from either or to both and I ask people to talk about what are the dilemmas that you're facing. So many people will put out work life. And actually, to your point and to your question, that only exacerbated in the pandemic, when the boundaries between work and life went down, when the demands on both sides went up, when we were unable. So work life is a big one that people are dealing with in their individual lives. And these things apply in every moment in our lives. They're as basic as, what do I eat for breakfast? Am I disciplined and sticking with the diet that I have committed to and therefore going for a green smoothie? Or am I, letting go of that and going for my coffee and chocolate croissant? So like that's, at a very basic level, but we also see this show up in our relationships with our colleagues and peers. One of us has one point of view, one has another point of view. It feels like we're in conflict with each other. Can we accommodate different points of view? We see this in our organizations around navigating the tension between today and tomorrow, or between trying to hold things that are stable while also changing, or the tension between long-term goals that we're looking at and short-term goals, and what does that look like? We see it increasingly in organizations and trying to navigate this tension of what some people will call mission and markets, or social responsibility and financial responsibility, profit and planet. We see this in our politics, right? Our political landscape has become so fraught and polarized in either ors between different policies that we have lost that challenge or that possibility of finding places in which we have common ground. So we see it all over the place.
So if there is one tip that you have for everybody watching and listening on how to be able to live in this very difficult space that you talk about, what is one tip to live in both and thinking?
Well, I love that because in some ways we use the metaphor of meditating in terms of getting into both and thinking. And the reason we say that is because meditating is a lifetime practice, something that improves our life. That to be a Zen master is a lifetime of practicing and constantly coming back to this approach. And when you meditate, there's an entree point, which is just focusing on your breath. Shifting to focus on your breath. And we know that in the meditation sphere, if you focus on your breath, even just for a moment, I run, as I was saying, a women's leadership initiative, and we run executive programs. And my colleague, Amy Stengel, who was our program director, would introduce to all of us in the beginning of each program an arrival practice to just pause and focus on our breath. And it changed the whole nature of the program. So that very simple act of focusing on your breath can help you along the way. We say the same thing is true with both and thinking. It's a lifetime practice. We're constantly reminding ourselves to move beyond the either or, to let go of the controlling need to be right, to let go of the controlling need to have certainty and to know what's going to happen next. This is a lifetime of practice. And the entree point, if you will, we say is changing the question. And so what that means is that when we experience two different things that seem like they're in conflict with each other, we pit them against one another, and the question we ask is an either or question. Which one of these should I choose? Which one of these should I preference? Should I emphasize? And changing the question invites us into rethinking the possibility space. So if we change the question from, am I more career-oriented of an individual or more family-oriented, to how can I accommodate both a robust and a successful career alongside a commitment to and engagement with my family, all of a sudden that question invites us into new possibilities, new opportunities that we wouldn't have seen before. So I'll give you a quick example. Again, my co-author is Marianne Lewis, and she is the dean of her business school at University of Cincinnati, the Lindner Business School. And all of the administrators at the school have been reading the book, and they were talking about the discussion about diversity, which we've all talked about. And oftentimes, increasingly, as we talk about navigating diversity in our organizations, it gets pitted as this trade-off between access and diversity and expanding diversity and excellence. Do we want excellence and meritocracy, or do we want diversity and access? And as they were talking about this, one of the leaders of the organization, with the book in mind, said, wait, what's the both and here? How can we achieve access and excellence, diversity and expansion, inclusion, and the high quality. And it opened up all kinds of new conversations. So change the question is the entree point into both and thinking.
Yeah, I personally use meditation. I've been using it for more than 10 years, and it just slows everything down. And in a world that feels very frenetic and we need answers quickly, and that's not always possible, it just slows the brain down and anchors you so you can really listen and be fully present. So you're not just responding in ego where, oh, I want to be right. I have to be right. Oh, I'm so upset. And it really just slows the brain down. A lot of the people watching and listening to this podcast work in customer experience. They work at companies where they want to treat their customers better. They have a lot of work to do, but they still need to take care of the day-to-day. So they've got their eye on the horizon and they're still dealing with customer issues all day. What advice do you have for them that they have to take care of their customers today, but they're also worried, are we going to be relevant tomorrow?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that's a core tension. This tension, it's like the IBM tension, this tension between today and tomorrow, continuing to do what we do in the short term and approaching the long term. And you know, you have to be focused on both. There was a great academic article back in the 1990s by Jim March where he said organizations, really effective organizations, are both continuing to do what they've always done. He talked about it as exploiting and innovating and changing and adapting and exploring. And we know that if organizations are so adaptive that they're always changing, they're frenetic and chaotic. But if they're so focused on the short term and what they've always done, then they're going to be obsolete really quickly. So that changing of question is really helpful. The second thing, so again, change the question. How could you both do both? The second thing that I'll say is what I had anticipated when I started this study at IBM and was looking at how they manage their existing product and their innovation was that I would find that if they asked the both and question, they would find all of these win-wins. There would be like the ideal, and we talk about this as a creative integration, these ideal places where both things happen at the same time. And we describe that creative integration as a mule, right? This ideal hybrid. It is stronger than a horse, faster than smarter than a donkey, right? The horse and the donkey hybrid, this integration. And we see these kinds of integrations in all kinds of places, and they're really brilliant when they emerge. So Einstein's theory of relativity is this kind of creative integration where he asked the question, how can an object be both at rest and in motion at the same time? And that's what the theory of relativity brings those together. So that's the sort of win-win, which I had expected to see at IBM, and I didn't see. Instead, what was happening at IBM was that they were making decisions between the existing product, supporting the existing product, and supporting the innovation that were shifting resources or shifting their organizational structures or moving so that they were shifting between the two, but they were making these micro shifts in service of, in the long term, being able to do both. And we talk about that as tightrope walking because the metaphor, the image is that you have a tightrope walker who's looking out to the horizon, moving forward, but never perfectly balanced. They're always balancing, but they're not going so far to the left or so far to the right that they're falling over. We talk about this as being consistently inconsistent. And so the way that this would apply in the customer experience is that, we have to pay attention to long-term change and short-term customer needs at the moment. And it may be that instead of finding this ultimate ideal win-win that does both, which there might be, it might be that what we're finding is these sort of micro shifting between sometimes we're paying attention at the moment to the short-term needs of our customers, and sometimes we're switching to the long-term demands of, making changes, and we're sort of shifting between them in service of being able to do both in the long term. I think that this kind of tightrope walking creative integration is what most people do when it comes to to work life and parenting, which is that we're not overemphasizing work, we're not overemphasizing life, but we're not balanced, but we're constantly making these micro shifts of our time and attention and resources. We're balancing, not balanced.
Yeah, I was just looking at LinkedIn, looking at the news, and one of the stories trending is that people had babies during COVID because working women, educated women, suddenly were home and they thought, this work-life balance is pretty good. Then they had the baby. Things are different now. People are being forced to go back to the office. So it's a little different. And I had a son during COVID, actually. I'm self-employed, but I could imagine that is hard for people that got used to working from home, being near their children. Now they're being asked to go back to the office. They don't really want to. So what advice do you have for employers that are actually trying to get employees back to the office, but at the same time, they don't want to lose employees because their policies are not very empathetic?
This is a huge dilemma for organizations. And Marianne and I wrote a piece around this notion of hybridity, because hybrid working seems like the ideal both and, right? It's how do we create the conditions where people can both have the flexibility and autonomy of being at home and have times where everybody is all together in the office. And so it seems like the ideal both and, but what we're finding is that while it's sort of, you could label it as a both and doing both and it's hybrid, what we're finding in most organizations is that it's the worst of both, not the best of both. So people are at home and there's not a sense of connection and there's no way of understanding what everybody else is doing. And then they're at work and there's no coordination. So it's kind of a ghost town. And we actually featured an organization called Rocketbook that does this really, really well. And the way that they do it well is that they first did a deep dive about what is it that people value about being at home. Well, they value the autonomy over their time. They value the chance to really sort of not have to drive into work and all of that. What do they really value of being at work? Well, if you're at work, what you really want to be doing, if you're in present in the office, what you really want to be doing is connecting with people and making those connections and enabling that. So how can they ensure that when you are home or for most of the week, you have total control of your time? In fact, you have total control of your time, that nobody cares or knows what you're doing. You just have to show up to the meetings at the right time and get the work done. And there's transparency about your calendar, but there's an assumption that if in the middle of the day, you need to go run out and run an errand or pick up, your kids from daycare or, do something for an elderly parent, like you're flexible to do that as long as you're at meetings when you need to be, and they'll organize meetings around that. And when you're at work, they are going to make sure that that is a valuable moment. So every week they have, Wednesdays is the day that it's an all company meeting. Everybody's going to be there at the same time. Groups within the company tend to meet on those days so that they can connect. So they have really worked to benefit from both the at-home and at-work experience, creating both the autonomy and the connection in both experiences that a lot of companies are finding it hard to do. They're just sort of saying, hey, we're going to do both, sometime at work, sometime at home, and it actually neither works well.
Yeah, it's not working. That's so wise, and I think everybody can learn from your book that sometimes you have to do something that you weren't prepared to do, and you're going to have to shift your mindset in order to do that. If there is one message you have for everybody watching and listening about one, I know you said meditation is a really big one, but any closing note before we do rapid fire that you just really have seen be really effective for people that are struggling with the sheer workload of today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I do think that the key takeaway for me, the starting point for me, and again, there's sort of paradox and both and 1.0, and then there's both and 2.0. The invitation for those starting out is really change the question. And it's funny, I have twins. I have 16-year-old twins, and raising kids is challenging as it is. Raising twins and watching them, and they know, they roll their eyes at me, but they certainly know that when they get into a conflict of which one of them gets to sit in the front seat of the car, which one of them the question that I will ask them is, it's not an either or, what's the both and I think that that's true, is that the invitation to change the question, to rethink our challenges, our dilemmas, again, can open up space. I would add, though, that it's not easy. I don't want it to sort of sound so simplified, because it opens up all kinds of emotional challenges. One of the things that we found in so many of the workshops that we've done is that when we invite people to think about a both and for someone else, it's easy to do. When we invite them to think about their own both and, forget it. Then we get stuck into our thinking. So it's change the question and invite other people into thinking about these both ands with you.
Sometimes it's so much easier to give other people advice than to see your own life objectively because you're in it. So that totally makes sense to me. So our audience can get to know you a little bit better. Let's do some rapid fire. Wendy, are you ready?
Sure, yes.
All right, first question. What did you eat for breakfast today?
Well, now that I am a green smoothie person for breakfast.
Okay. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh, hiking a mountain.
What is one mental health strategy for managing hard days?
I work out. I go for walks and work out.
What is your favorite type of vacation?
Traveling anywhere with my family.
If you could have lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow. I'm going to go with Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan of her and her work, daring greatly, and would love to hear more about how she got there.
That's a great answer. If you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
Paradoxical. I think when my kids were born, we wanted to put a sign over their bed that said, "This too shall pass." And the reason that we like that is because it's the recognition that both if there are hard times, that life is dynamic. If we're hitting hard times, this will pass. But also when you're hitting the good times, these pass too. So notice and be in the moment and know that things will change.
I love that. And it's so true when you have babies at home, because that period is very hard. But then when your babies aren't babies anymore, you're kind of sad. You're like, I'm not going to have a baby anymore in my house. This is so sad. I have 2 kids and I'm done. So I totally understand that you kind of want the time to go by because it's so exhausting having a baby. At the same time, you're sad when it's over. So I love that.
As they say, the days are long, but the years are short.
Yes, 100%. If people want to buy copies of your book, Both and Thinking, where can they do that?
The easiest place to go, we have a website, bothandthinking.net, and we have both more information about the book and some tools to implement the book in your organizations, as well as access to where to buy the book and podcasts and media to deepen your understanding and ways to connect with us.
Well, awesome. I'm excited to learn more about Both and. I think everybody watching and listening can leverage this for themselves and their organizations. All of you have been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time, thanks for watching.